The wind off the Davis Strait didn't just blow, it carved. For Elias Thorne, a 37-year-old logistics specialist with a penchant for high-stakes puzzles, the cold was a constant companion. He stood on the edge of the Pituffik space base, looking out over a landscape that looked like the surface of another planet. To most, Greenland was a vast, frozen wasteland of white and blue, but Elias saw it differently. He saw it as a massive, unsinkable aircraft carrier parked in the most important neighborhood of the 21st century. Elias had spent his career moving pieces across the global board, but his recent assignment here felt different. The energy in Washington had shifted. For years, the Arctic was an afterthought, a place of scientific curiosity and melting glaciers. But recently, a new vision had taken hold, one that viewed this island not as a frozen relic, but as the ultimate piece of strategic real estate. Elias remembered the briefing that had changed his perspective, a session filled with maps that showed the world from the top down rather than the side on. From that angle, Greenland wasn't a remote island. It was the center of the world. He walked back toward the command center, his boots crunching on the permafrost. Inside, the screens were alive with data satellite feeds, mineral surveys, and shipping lane projections. Elias grabbed a coffee and settled into his station. His task was to synthesize why this piece of ice was suddenly the cornerstone of American national security. The first and most urgent reason was printed in the digital tracks of Russian and Chinese vessels flickering on the radar. For decades, the Arctic was a buffer zone, protected by its own inhospitable climate. But as the ice thinned, the buffer was becoming a highway. Russia was refurbishing Soviet-era bases, and China had declared itself a near-Arctic state, a term that made Elias's jaw tighten every time he heard it. They weren't just exploring, they were positioning. If the United States didn't secure Greenland, it was essentially leaving the front door to the North American continent unlocked. Elias pulled up a map of the Golden Dome, the ambitious missile defense project the administration was pushing. To protect the American heartland from the new generation of hypersonic threats, you needed a vantage point. Greenland provided that height. It was the ultimate high ground. From here, sensors could pick up threats long before they reached the Canadian border or the American coastline. It was about permanence and control. Ownership wasn't just a real estate term in this context, it was a security guarantee. If the US owned the land, it didn't have to ask permission to defend itself. Later that afternoon, Elias met with Sarah, a geologist who had been surveying the jagged fjords to the south. They sat in the small cafeteria, the hum of the base's generators providing a steady backdrop to their conversation. Sarah laid out a series of core samples on the table, though Elias knew the data by heart. "It's all here, Elias," Sarah said, pointing to the dark streaks in the rock. "Neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, the stuff that makes the world turn. Everyone talks about oil, but these rare earth minerals are the real prize. Without them, we don't have smartphones, we don't have EV batteries, and we certainly don't have F-35 fighter jets." Elias nodded. He knew the bottleneck. Currently, China controlled the vast majority of the global supply and refining process for these materials. It was a strategic vulnerability that kept the Pentagon up at night. Greenland, according to the latest surveys, held some of the largest untapped deposits on Earth. To the administration, acquiring Greenland wasn't just a land grab, it was an independence move. It was about dig, baby, dig, but with a high-tech twist. By securing these resources, the US could decouple its military supply chain from its primary adversary. It was the ultimate America First insurance policy. The critics call it a real estate deal, Elias remarked, watching the steam rise from his cup. "In a way it is," Sarah replied, "but it's a deal for the next 100 years. Think about the shipping routes. The Northwest Passage is opening up. If you control Greenland, you control the shortest path between Europe and Asia. You're looking at a maritime hub that could rival Singapore or Panama. It's about who writes the rules for the new ocean." Elias looked out the window. The sun was beginning its long, slow dip toward the horizon, casting orange and purple hues across the ice cap. He thought about the skepticism back home, the people who laughed at the idea of buying an island. They saw the cost, but they didn't see the value. They didn't see the centuries of American expansion that had led to this moment. They forgot that Alaska was once called Seward's Folly, before it became a gold mine and a strategic fortress against the Soviet Union. To Elias, the logic was as clear as the Arctic air. The world was changing. The old rules of cooperation were being replaced by a more direct, competitive reality. The administration's focus on Greenland was a recognition of that reality. It was a rejection of the idea that the US should just be a partner in its own backyard. Ownership meant stability. It meant that 1,000 years from now, the northern flank of the American experiment would be secure, not subject to the shifting whims of European allies or the encroaching reach of Eastern powers. He spent the evening drafting a report on the framework. It wasn't just about military bases, it was about integration. He envisioned a future where Greenland was the 51st state, or at least a territory as integral as Puerto Rico or Guam. He imagined American investment pouring into new ports, modernized schools, and high-speed data centers cooled by the natural Arctic environment. It wouldn't just be a takeover, it would be an uplift. The residents, many of whom struggled with a lack of infrastructure and economic opportunity under the current Danish administration, would find themselves at the center of a new American century. Elias knew the diplomacy was messy. The tariffs being threatened against those who blocked the path were hardball tactics. But in his world, you didn't win the Arctic by playing soft. The Russians weren't playing soft. The Chinese weren't playing soft. Why should the United States? Around midnight, Elias took a walk outside. The Aurora Borealis was dancing overhead, green and violet ribbons shimmering against the black velvet of the sky. It was a reminder of the sheer scale of the world and the insignificance of human bickering in the face of nature. But it also reminded him of the responsibility of leadership. He thought about the president's words about how this was about national security and freedom throughout the world. It sounded like rhetoric to some, but standing here, feeling the raw power of the environment, Elias felt the truth in it. If the US retreated, someone else would fill the void. And he knew exactly what that someone else looked like. They didn't value freedom. They valued extraction and dominance. Greenland was the shield. It was the storehouse. It was the future. As a man in his late 30s, Elias often thought about the world he would leave behind. He didn't want to leave a world where America was a second-tier power, begging for mineral rights and permission to fly over its own northern border. He wanted to leave a world where the American flag flew over this golden dome, a world where the resources under this ice fueled a new era of American prosperity. He realized then that the purchase of Greenland wasn't about the price tag. It was about the vision to see what others missed. It was about the courage to claim a destiny before someone else did. The cold didn't feel so biting anymore. Elias Thorne turned back toward the base, his mind focused on the data, the maps, and the inevitable expansion of the frontier. The North was calling, and for the first time in a long time, America was finally answering. He sat back at his desk and opened a fresh document. He titled it, The Arctic Aegis: Why Greenland is the Non-Negotiable Future of American Sovereignty. He began to type, his fingers moving with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a logistics specialist anymore. He was a builder of a new map. And as the sun began its brief disappearance, Elias knew that when it rose again, it would shine on a world where the ice-locked vision was becoming a reality, one fjord, one mineral vein, and one strategic deal at a time. The complexity of the task ahead didn't daunt him, it energized him. He understood that large-scale shifts in history often required bold, even controversial maneuvers. For a blue-colored individual who valued the depth of strategy and the legacy of protection, this wasn't just about a transaction. It was about the profound duty to ensure that the next generation lived in a world where their interests were fortified. Elias leaned into the glow of his monitors, the quiet of the Arctic base, amplifying the gravity of his work. Every line of his report was a brick in the wall of this new northern fortress. He detailed the potential for deep-water ports that could handle the world's largest tankers, bypassing the congested southern routes. He outlined how American technology could extract resources with far greater environmental stewardship than the alternatives. This was the American way, to see a frontier and to civilize it with innovation and strength. As he saved the final draft, Elias felt a rare moment of certainty. The path was set, the frozen giant was waking up, and it was going to be an American giant. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the future map. A map where the blue of the sea and the white of the ice were forever protected by the red, white, and blue of a nation that refused to be left behind.